The tankers stop. Not one or two, all of them. Within 4 hours of Iran's announcement of a maritime security operation in the Persian Gulf, the 20 very large crude carriers that were transiting the Strait of Hormuz have either turned around, anchored outside the strait, or diverted toward alternative anchorage. The decision is not made by any government. It is made by shipping companies and their insurers. Risk assessors in London and Oslo who have reached the same conclusion. The war risk premium on a Hormuz transit has become uninsurable at any commercially viable rate. Within 6 hours, oil futures markets in New York and London are registering a spike that analysts will later describe as one of the fastest single-session moves in history. The Strait of Hormuz has not been physically closed. No ship has been physically stopped by the Iranian Navy. But the global energy system, a system built on the continuous, uninterrupted flow of hydrocarbons through a 33 nautical mile bottleneck, has already begun to seize up. This is what a Hormuz closure actually looks like. Not a single dramatic military event, but a cascading system failure that begins before the first mine is laid. This is the command structure. Let's break it down. Approximately 20 to 21 million barrels of oil and oil products transit the Strait of Hormuz every day. This represents approximately 20% of global oil consumption, 1 barrel in 5, on a planet whose economy runs on hydrocarbons at a rate that cannot be immediately reduced. The same strait carries approximately 20% of global liquefied natural gas trade, including virtually all LNG exports from Qatar, the world's largest LNG exporter. The strait is geographically controlled from the Iranian side. The islands of Abu Musa, Greater Tunb, and Lesser Tunb, which Iran seized from the UAE in 1971, are Iranian territory. Iranian strategic doctrine has explicitly incorporated the Hormuz threat as a deterrent for 4 decades. The logic: if Iran cannot deter attack through conventional military forces, it can deter through the asymmetric threat to the global energy supply. Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline, the Petroline, can carry approximately 5 million barrels per day. The UAE's Fujairah pipeline adds approximately 1.5 million barrels per day. Combined, approximately 6 to 7 million barrels per day of bypass capacity. Against a daily transit flow of 20 to 21 million barrels, between 13 and 15 million barrels per day has no viable alternative export route. It stays in the ground, or it accumulates in storage until the strait reopens. The LNG situation is, if anything, more acute. Qatari LNG that cannot transit the Strait of Hormuz cannot reach its customers. Period. A critical distinction that is frequently obscured in public discussion. A closure of the strait is not a single binary event. It exists on a spectrum. Level 1. The insurance-based shutdown. If Iran declares a maritime security operation, war risk insurance premiums become commercially prohibitive, and the strait is effectively closed to commercial traffic without a single Iranian missile being fired. Level 2. Selective disruption through targeted attacks on specific vessels. Iran demonstrated this capability in 2019 through limpet mine operations. Level 3. Active maritime denial through mine warfare. Iran's mine inventory, several thousand mines, would physically block transit until mines are cleared, a process that takes weeks to months. Level 4. Full military blockade. The most militarily demanding and most escalation-prone option. It removes whatever diplomatic ambiguity the lower levels maintained. The IRGC Navy is the primary instrument of asymmetric maritime coercion. It employs a doctrine of swarm tactics using fast attack craft, small, highly maneuverable vessels armed with RPGs, heavy machine guns, and anti-ship missiles, supplemented by shore-based anti-ship missile batteries, midget submarines, and sea mines. The IRGC Navy's shore-based anti-ship missile inventory is the most operationally significant element. The Noor, Qatar, and Khalij Fars missiles can engage targets at ranges of 120 to 250 kilometers. These systems can receive targeting data from radar, or UAV, and launch with minimal self-exposure. U.S. Naval Forces Central Command is headquartered in Bahrain, and commands the forces of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. The Fifth Fleet maintains mine countermeasures vessels specifically in the region because of the recognized Iranian mine threat. The Combined Maritime Forces, 40-plus countries, provides the organizational framework for multilateral escort and clearing operations. Abqaiq processes approximately 7% of global daily supply. A successful Iranian strike on Abqaiq would add production disruption to transit disruption, compounding the price shock. Qatar's Ras Laffan handles most of Qatar's 77 million tons per year LNG output. It is within range of Iranian precision strike systems. The marine insurance market, concentrated in Lloyd's and the P&I clubs, determines whether commercial shipping can operate. When war risk premiums become commercially prohibitive, shipping companies withdraw their vessels. This happens faster than any military action can occur. A very large crude carrier, a VLCC, carries approximately 2 million barrels per voyage. At normal transit rates, the daily flow requires approximately 8 to 10 VLCC transits per day in the outbound lane alone. The disruption begins not when a ship is physically stopped, but when the accumulation of waiting ships causes the logistical system, scheduling, charter arrangements, delivery commitments, to begin to fail. The USSPR can release approximately 4.4 million barrels per day at maximum. Combined IEA releases might add 3 to 4 million barrels per day more. Against a daily deficit of 13 to 15 million barrels from a full closure, even maximum SPR utilization covers only 30 to 50% of the gap. The remainder falls on demand destruction. Naval mines are inexpensive relative to the economic damage they produce. They are difficult and slow to clear. Their presence deters commercial shipping even in areas where no mines have been confirmed. A mining operation in the Strait's shipping lanes could render the lanes unusable within days, even if U.S. and allied naval forces are present and attempting to prevent the operation. The strategic logic: not to permanently block the strait, but to raise the cost of transit to the point where commercial shipping withdraws, and then use the time this withdrawal buys to extract maximum political leverage. Within days, IEA member states would authorize and begin SPR releases. Saudi Arabia's Petroline would operate at maximum capacity. The UAE's Fujairah pipeline would flow at maximum. But these alternatives cover only a fraction of the disrupted flow. U.S. shale production cannot be immediately increased. New drilling and completion takes months to a year to bring online. Demand destruction is the energy system's last resort adjustment mechanism. When prices rise sufficiently, consumers and industries reduce consumption, not because they choose to, but because they cannot afford to continue. The first phase of a Hormuz closure is not military. It is financial. The trigger could be any credible signal of Iranian intent: a formal declaration of a maritime security operation, a series of mine sightings reported by commercial vessels, or simply a credible intelligence report leaked to shipping industry media. War risk insurance premiums spike to levels of 1 to 3% or higher within hours. At these levels, the additional insurance cost per voyage becomes commercially unviable. Shipping companies withdraw their vessels to safe anchorage. The physical manifestation: the accumulation of loaded tankers in anchorage areas outside the strait, waiting for the situation to clarify. Within 24 to 72 hours of the initial disruption signal, the market shock enters its acute phase. Historical precedents and energy market modeling suggest moves of 30 to 60% above pre-crisis levels within the first week of a credible, sustained Hormuz threat. The LNG market responds simultaneously. European energy utilities find their gas restocking plans disrupted. Asian buyers compete with Europe for spot LNG cargoes. Government responses at this phase are primarily signaling. They have not yet materially changed the operational situation in the strait. The most direct transmission: fuel prices affect the cost of every good that is transported, every industrial process that uses energy, and every household that heats or cools its home. A 50% increase in oil prices, sustained for 3 months, would add approximately 1 to 2 percentage points to consumer price inflation in most advanced economies. Food prices represent a secondary transmission channel. Agricultural production is energy-intensive. Fertilizers are produced from natural gas. Pesticides are petrochemically derived. The entire logistics chain is petroleum-dependent. The macroeconomic consequences of a prolonged, 3 months or more, full closure would be assessed by most credible modeling as recession-inducing for the global economy. The immediate military response. Surge in surveillance and intelligence operations. P-8. A Poseidon, EP-3 electronic reconnaissance, and satellite platforms tasked to maximum collection. Mine countermeasures operations would be the primary military task. The Avenger-class MCM fleet in Bahrain, with Allied augmentation, would begin systematic clearing of the inbound and outbound shipping lanes. The rules of engagement question are U.S. The forces authorized to strike Iranian shore-based systems that threaten the MCM vessels. If so, does that authorization extend to Iranian territory? Each level of authorization carries its own escalation implication. Striking Iranian positions on Abu Musa means striking territory Iran claims as sovereign. Striking the Iranian mainland escalates further. After 60 to 90 days of maximum SPR utilization, the buffer capacity is substantially exhausted. China, industrial rationing, emergency sourcing from Russia, but significant economic slowdown still beginning. India faces a specific vulnerability. 60% of its oil imports from the Gulf, refineries configured for Gulf crude, limited strategic reserves. India's political pressure for resolution by diplomatic or other means becomes acute. On the resolution pathway, Iran extracts sufficient political leverage to negotiate the concession it was seeking and reopens the strait on terms allowing it to claim success. This establishes a precedent that Hormuz coercion works. The escalation pathway. Military response to the disruption produces an engagement that neither side can contain. The economic consequences of this pathway would substantially exceed the cost of the disruption that triggered it. The coercive pause. The most historically consistent outcome of asymmetric maritime coercion. Neither side achieves its objectives. The strait reopens. Prices decline from their peak but remain elevated. The structural issues remain unresolved. The next crisis begins its incubation. The macroeconomic consequences of a full Hormuz closure extending beyond 30 days would be the most significant economic shock since the 2008 financial crisis. Energy importers with limited foreign exchange, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and parts of Southeast Asia, would face the most severe economic stress. The long-term energy investment response would be significant. Alternative supply routes, LNG regasification terminal expansion, strategic reserve capacity increases, and acceleration of renewable energy investment. The concentration of the marine insurance market in Lloyd's and the P&I clubs means that a single risk assessment cycle can remove the commercial viability of Persian Gulf shipping within hours. This is a systemic vulnerability. It means that the threshold for effective Hormuz disruption is lower than the threshold for military closure. Iran does not need to physically stop a ship to close the strait economically. It needs only to convince the insurance market that the risk of physical stoppage is sufficiently high that ensuring the transit is commercially irrational. This is an information and credibility problem as much as a military one. Military deterrence alone cannot fully address it. The global oil trade routes that pass through Hormuz, Malacca, and Suez represent a logistical system built for efficiency rather than resilience. Just-in-time delivery, minimal strategic reserves, single route dependency. All of these are economically optimal in stable conditions and catastrophically fragile under disruption. The role of Iran as the controlling actor in this vulnerability is itself a structural feature of the global energy system that successive attempts at economic coercion, the sanctions regime, have failed to modify. Iran's strategic position at the entrance to the Persian Gulf is a geographic fact that cannot be negotiated away, sanctioned away, or deterred away without the willingness to use military force at a scale and duration that has not been attempted. The Strait of Hormuz is not a crisis that has not happened. It is a crisis that is structurally present in the global energy system as a constant low-level risk. A closure is not a single event. It is a spectrum of disruption from insurance withdrawal through active military blockade, each level with different economic, military, and diplomatic characteristics. The economic effect begins before the military action through the financial mechanism of market pricing. The military response is slow relative to the economic effect, meaning the disruption accumulates for weeks before the military can materially change the situation. The most consequential structural insight: the global energy system's efficiency has been optimized at the cost of resilience, and Hormuz is the point where that trade-off is most exposed. The 20% of global oil supply that transits 33 nautical miles of water that Iran can credibly threaten represents a concentration of systemic risk that no other geography in the global economy replicates. Hormuz is not just a passage between the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea. It is a structural pressure point of the global system. Structure determines what is possible. At Hormuz, the structure makes the impossible not only possible, but repeatedly threatened. You have been watching The Command Structure. Subscribe if you think in systems.